My son was dying and he needed my kidney. My daughter-in-law told me, "It's your duty, you're his mother." The doctor was already getting ready to operate on me when suddenly my 9-year-old grandson ran into the room and screamed, "Grandma, should I tell them the real reason why my dad needs your kidney?" The entire medical team froze. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it's reached. I'm lying on the cold steel of the operating table. The white light from the surgical lamp is shining right in my eyes, so blinding, I want to squeeze them shut, but I can't. My whole body is stiff, and it's not from the cold. It's a feeling of suffocation, like destiny has its hands wrapped around my neck. The beep, beep of the heart monitor is a steady rhythm, but every beat feels like a hammer pounding in my head. I can hear every sound in the room with perfect clarity. The metallic clinking of instruments as the nurse arranges them, the rustle of paper as Dr. Anderson reviews my file, and even the soft whispers from the other side of the glass, where my daughter-in-law Linda is standing with her parents. I try to look up through the frosted glass. There's Linda with her arms crossed over her chest and a look as sharp as a razor. She's whispering something to her parents, but her eyes never leave me, as if she's ordering me, "Sign it, do it, don't hesitate." I already signed it. The consent form to donate my kidney to Michael, my son. That paper must be somewhere on the doctor's desk now, with my shaky signature marking a commitment I can't take back. The nurse already has the syringe in her hand. The anesthesia glints under the light. I close my eyes. I try to take a deep breath, but my chest feels like it's filled with lead. I think of Michael, my oldest son, who I raised and sacrificed my entire life to protect. He's in the next room weak, waiting for my kidney to survive. I tell myself this is the right thing to do. As a mother, I have to do it. But why do I feel this emptiness in my soul, this nameless dread? Suddenly, a loud noise startles me. The door to the operating room flew open, and a cold gust of air rushed in, making the instrument tray on the table tremble and clink. The whole room seemed to hold its breath. I opened my eyes trying to lift my head, even though the straps held me down tight. Jacob, my 9-year-old grandson, burst in like a little tornado. His sneakers were covered in mud, his school uniform was wrinkled, and his little chest was heaving as he gasped for air. Behind him, a terrified nurse was chasing him, shouting as she ran, "Kid, you can't come in here. Oh my God, stop!" But Jacob didn't stop. He ran straight to me, his big round eyes filled with fear, but also with determination. "Grandma," he said, his voice trembling, but so clear it squeezed my heart. "Should I tell everyone why my dad really needs your kidney?" The entire room fell silent. The beep of the heart monitor now seemed louder, as if it wanted to tear through the space. A doctor standing nearby dropped a pair of surgical forceps. The sound of metal hitting the marble floor was jarring like a tear in the fabric of tension. I looked at Jacob, my sweet grandson, who I still held in my arms and told stories to every night. There he was, clutching an old cell phone, his face pale but his eyes shining. What did he know? Why was he saying that? My heart was racing as if it wanted to beat its way out of my chest. I wanted to scream, to ask him right then and there, but my throat was so dry I couldn't form a single word. Dr. Anderson, the lead surgeon, frowned. He raised a hand signaling the entire team to pause. His voice was deep but sharp. "Whatever you have to say it now." I watched his gaze pass over me and land on Jacob as if he too was caught in this bizarre moment. On the other side of the glass, Linda slammed her hand on the door, making the pane rattle. "Don't listen to him!" she shrieked, her voice high-pitched, almost hysterical. "He's just a kid. What does he know?" But Linda's gaze wasn't cold anymore. It was trembling, filled with panic, as if a secret was about to be exposed. Jacob didn't look at his mom. He only looked at me, gripping the phone so tightly in his little hand that his knuckles turned white. He took a deep breath, as if gathering all the courage in his life. I wanted to sit up to hug him, to tell him not to be afraid, but I couldn't move. I could only watch, and in my little grandson's eyes I saw a pain, a truth that he was trying to bring to light. In that instant, while the whole room held its breath, memories of the past flooded my mind like an avalanche from the days when I thought my family was a tight circle full of love and trust. I remembered my old house where every corner smelled of disinfectant, a smell I had gotten so used to that I didn't even notice it anymore. I'm 57 years old, but sometimes I feel much older, as if time stole my vitality long ago. My husband David has been bedridden for over 10 years. He sits in his old wheelchair, its wheels creaking every time I push him onto the patio for some fresh air. He almost never speaks, just lets out a sigh now, and then his gaze lost in the distance. Once I took his hand and asked, "David, are you tired of this life?" He just blinked without answering. I don't know if he understood me or if I was just talking to myself. That house was my whole world, the place where I raised my 2 sons, Michael and Daniel. I did everything to get them ahead. I would get up at dawn to go to the market to sell fruit. In the afternoons, I would sit and sew clothes for the neighbors, and sometimes I would stay up until midnight mending torn shirts to deliver them on time. My hands became rough and calloused. My nails were always dirty from digging through produce at the market. But I never complained. I just wanted Michael and Daniel to have a better life, to not suffer like I did. Michael, my oldest, was my pride and joy. He was strong, tall, worked in construction, and always came home with a loud laugh. But in recent years, he started to get weak. At first, it was just fatigue. Then slowly I saw him turn pale with sunken eyes, and once I felt a horrible terror when he told me he was urinating blood. I hugged him and asked, "Michael, what's wrong, son? Tell me." He just shook his head and smiled weakly. "Don't worry, Mom. It's probably just from working so hard." Linda, my daughter-in-law, came into our lives like a strange wind. She was pretty, spoke sweetly, and at first I truly believed she was a blessing for Michael. She took great care of him, brought medicine home, watched his meals, and reminded him to take his pills at the exact time. All the neighbors praised me. "You're so lucky, Emily, with such a good daughter-in-law." And I believed it too. Every time I saw Linda give Michael a bowl of soup, I told myself I was worrying too much, but sometimes I would catch her gaze cold and calculating as if she were hiding something. One night I saw her on the patio, whispering on the phone in the middle of the night, her voice low but rushed. "Don't worry, everything is going according to plan." I asked her, "Linda, who are you calling so late?" She jumped and laughed nervously. "Just a friend, Mom. You should go to sleep." Daniel, my younger son, was different. He's 26. He lives a few blocks from my house and works as a plumber and electrician. Daniel doesn't talk much, but every time he came to visit, he always brought something to eat, sometimes oranges, other times a loaf of bread that was still warm. He would sit next to me, fixing the squeaky ceiling fan or changing a light bulb in the kitchen. Once he looked at me and said in his deep voice, "Mom, don't kill yourself working like this. I don't want to see you exhausted." I just smiled and waved my hand. "I can still handle it, Daniel. You worry about your brother, he needs you more." But Daniel just shook his head, his eyes full of concern. Jacob, my sweet grandson, was my only joy in those heavy days. He's 9 and often came to my house with his little backpack on. Jacob liked to sit on the patio and play with some plastic cars I bought him at the flea market. He would tell me stories, innocent tales that sometimes left me chilled. Once he looked at me with his round eyes and said, "Grandma, my mom talks on the phone at night." I heard her say something about some medicine, but I didn't understand. I smiled and ruffled his hair. "She was probably asking the doctor something for your dad. Don't think so much about it, sweetie." But inside me, a seed of unease began to sprout. And then one afternoon, everything changed. I was in the kitchen making dinner. The smell of toasted rice filled the air when Linda walked in. She didn't say hello. She didn't smile. She just stood there with her arms crossed. Her voice was sharp like a knife cutting the air. "Mom, the doctor says only your kidney is a match. It's your responsibility. You have to save him." I froze. The spoon in my hand fell into the pan with a loud clatter. I looked at her, trying to find a little warmth in her eyes, but I only saw a cold determination, almost a demand. "Linda, I know I'll do anything for Michael," I whispered, but my throat felt dry. She nodded as if she had achieved her goal and turned around. Not even 10 minutes later, Linda's parents showed up. They walked into my house as if they owned it. They sat at the dining room table and said in unison, "That's right. A mother's duty is something you can't run from. This whole family depends on you now." I stood there still holding the spoon, feeling cornered. Michael, who was leaning on a chair at that moment so thin I almost didn't recognize him, took my hand. His hand was ice cold. "Mom," he whispered, "I trust you to save me." I looked into his eyes. Those eyes that used to shine with so much life as a child now only reflected exhaustion and pleading. I nodded, unable to say anything, suddenly feeling like the small room had become suffocating. The smell of medicinal herbs from David's pot in the corner made me feel like I couldn't breathe. That night I brought David his bowl of soup like every day. The squeak of his wheelchair on the cement floor was a constant reminder that I was carrying this whole family on my shoulders. I put the bowl in front of him. I looked at him, but he just sighed, saying nothing. I wanted to tell him to ask him if I was doing the right thing, but he was just there motionless like a shadow. I went out to the patio where Jacob was playing with his toy car. He looked up, his eyes bright, but filled with doubt. "Grandma, what if someone gets sick because another person gives them medicine?" I stopped dead in my tracks. My heart skipped a beat. "Why do you ask that, sweetie?" I said, trying to stay calm. But Jacob just lowered his head and kept pushing his car without answering. What I didn't know was that at that moment, I was on the edge of an abyss, and just a few more steps would make me fall. The days that followed that afternoon when Linda came to my house and left me no choice, my life felt crushed by an invisible pressure heavier than the suffocating summer heat in the Midwest. I kept getting up early, going to the market to sell my vegetables and oranges, sitting under the dim light to sew clothes, but my soul was no longer at peace. Every step I took, every stitch I made carried a question with it. Am I doing the right thing? Do I really have to sacrifice myself like this? But then, Michael's pleading gaze, Linda's sharp words, and her parents' scrutinizing looks clung to me, giving me no respite. The next morning, as the sun was just beginning to rise, Linda was already at my door. I had just made some tea. The aroma of mint was just starting to fill the house when she walked in without knocking, without a greeting. "Mom," she said, her voice as firm as a nail. "The doctor says there isn't much time left. If you keep hesitating, he could be in danger." She placed a stack of medical papers on the dining room table, white sheets full of numbers and signatures that I didn't fully understand. She pointed to each line as if teaching a child. "It says right here that you are the only match. No one else can save him." I just stood there holding the teapot. The hot water burned my fingers, but I felt no pain. I just listened to the sound of the broom scraping against the cement as I started to sweep the house as a way to escape Linda's gaze. "I heard you," I said, my voice barely audible. "I'll do anything for Michael." But inside, a heavy rock was pressing on me, making me want to scream, to run away. I kept sweeping. The sound of the broom was like a sad rhythm trying to drown out Linda's words. But she didn't stop. She stood there watching me as if waiting for me to nod one more time to confirm that I wouldn't dare refuse. When she left, I sat in a chair and covered my face with my hands. I thought of Michael, of the days when he was little and would run after me in the market holding onto my skirt and laughing out loud. "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to build you a beautiful house." Now he lay there, thin pale, reduced to a shadow of his former self. I wondered if I could just let him go without doing anything, but every time I thought about donating my kidney, fear washed over me. A fear not of the surgery, but of the feeling that I was being pushed towards something bigger, darker, that I couldn't see clearly. That night, Linda's parents arrived. They brought a basket of fruit, some mangoes and oranges, but they just left it on the table as a token gesture and sat in the two main chairs in the living room as if they owned the house. Her father, Mr. Thompson, coughed a couple of times and said in a raspy voice, "In my day, parents would sacrifice everything for their children. My grandmother sold all her land to save her son. Now it's your turn, you have to do the same." Linda's mother, Mrs. Thompson, nodded with a gaze as sharp as a knife. "If you refuse, the honor of this family will be dragged through the mud. What will the neighbors say? They'll say you don't love your son, that you don't deserve to be a mother." I sat there, gripping the edge of the table, feeling cornered in a dark room. I wanted to say something, to ask them why the entire burden fell on me, but I couldn't open my mouth. I just lowered my head and nodded slightly like a robot. Dinner that night was as heavy as a funeral. Linda, with feigned skill, put a piece of chicken on my plate, but her voice was cold. "Eat up, Mom, save your strength for the surgery." I looked at the chicken on my plate, but I couldn't swallow. Michael was sitting across from me, his face gaunt and his eyes sunken. He tried to smile weakly. "Mom, I know you'll save me just like all the times you saved me when I was a kid." His words were like a stab to my heart. I remembered the days he had a high fever, and I would spend the night awake wiping him with damp cloths, or the times he fell off his bike and I would run to bandage his wounds. I was always there. I was always the mother, ready to do anything. But this time, why did I feel so much fear? Daniel was sitting in a corner of the table, silent as a shadow. He didn't eat. He just stirred his spoon in his soup bowl, never taking his eyes off Linda. I saw his gaze full of suspicion, as if he were trying to see through my daughter-in-law's mask. I wanted to ask him, but I didn't dare. The air in the room was thick. The only sound was the clinking of spoons against plates like hammers on my conscience. After dinner, Linda stood up and personally took Michael's plate to the kitchen to wash it, not letting anyone else touch it. She did it quickly, but I noticed she checked the plate very carefully, as if she was afraid someone would see something in it. I couldn't sleep that night. Lying in my old bed, I listened to the tick-tock of the clock on the wall. Every second, a reminder that Michael's time was running out. I got up, walked down the hall to get a glass of water. Then I heard whispers from Linda and Michael's room. I stopped standing in the darkness, holding my breath. Linda's voice was low, but crisp. "Yes, after the transplant, we'll have all the data. Don't worry, she won't dare refuse." I stood there, my heart pounding. My hands were shaking so much I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Data. What were they talking about? I wanted to knock on the door to confront her, but just then Linda opened it. She was startled to see me and then smiled falsely. "Still awake, Mom? I was just calling to ask about his medications." I nodded and turned away, but I felt as if thorns had been driven into my heart. Linda's smile, her voice, everything was fake, like a mask hiding something terrible. The days following the tense conversation with Linda and her parents, I felt like I was living in a hazy dream, where everything familiar became strange and terrifying. I continued my daily chores, going to the market to sell sewing clothes, feeding my husband David, but every action was mechanical, soulless. My heart was heavy, as if a black cloud hung over my head, and Linda's words, Michael's pleading gaze swirled in my mind, giving me no peace. But then one afternoon, when Jacob, my 9-year-old grandson, came over, the first crack appeared in the wall of trust I was trying to hold up. Jacob came in his sneakers stained with mud and his little hands still sticky with paint from art class. He dropped his old backpack in a corner, sat on the floor, and took out the plastic toy car I had bought him at the flea market last year. I looked at him trying to smile, but my mind was a tangled mess. Jacob had always been a little light in my dark days, with his innocent stories and crystal-clear laugh, but that day he didn't smile. He pushed the car back and forth on the floor, his gaze distant, and suddenly he looked up and stared at me. "Grandma," he said in a low but clear voice, "what if Dad isn't sick because of life, but because someone is giving him medicine on purpose?" I flinched as if I'd been slapped. The spoon in my hand almost fell, but I managed to hold on, trembling. "Why do you say that, Jacob?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, but my heart was pounding. I looked into his eyes, so clear, but filled with a worry that seemed too big for his age. Jacob didn't answer right away. He lowered his head and continued playing with his car, but I saw how he clenched his hand as if holding something back. I wanted to hug him to ask him more, but I just managed a nervous laugh. "You think too much, sweetie. Your dad is sick and the doctors are curing him." But my smile was forced, and Jacob didn't return it. He just looked at me, stood up silently, picked up his backpack, and ran home. Jacob's question was like a stone thrown into the calm lake of my heart, creating ripples of doubt. I stood there in my small kitchen, looking at the vegetables on the table but unable to concentrate. I thought about Michael, about the pill bottles Linda always brought, about how she controlled everything related to my son. I told myself I was probably imagining things. Linda was Michael's wife. She loved him, she wouldn't hurt him. But deep in my heart, I knew something was wrong. That afternoon, Daniel stopped by. He brought his toolbox, saying he was there to fix the kitchen light that had been flickering the night before. I watched him climb the ladder turn and tighten things, and the light from the new bulb lit up the whole kitchen. But then, as he came down with the old bulb in his hand, Daniel looked at me with unusual seriousness. "Mom," he said in a low voice, almost a whisper. "My sister-in-law is acting very strange. I saw some unlabeled pill bottles in my brother's medicine cabinet, and she hides them very well." I gasped, and the plate I was washing slipped from my hands and crashed in the sink, splashing water on my shirt. "What are you saying?" I asked, my voice breaking. Daniel came down from the ladder and stood in front of me, his eyes full of worry. "Mom, I'm afraid my brother's illness isn't normal. I'm afraid someone on purpose." He didn't finish the sentence, but his look said it all. I stood there, my hands wet, feeling as if the floor were sinking beneath my feet. I wanted to scream to tell Daniel he was overthinking it, that Linda couldn't do something so terrible. But I couldn't speak. I just stared at Daniel, and in my head, Jacob's question echoed again. "What if Dad is sick because someone is giving him medicine?" I tried to dismiss the thought, but it clung to me like a shadow I couldn't escape. The next afternoon, I brought soup to the hospital for Michael. The white room and the sharp smell of disinfectant made me feel short of breath. Michael was lying down thin with IV lines in both arms, but still he tried to smile when he saw me. "Mom, you're here," he said with a weak voice. I put the bowl on the small table, and as I was about to give him the first spoonful, I saw Linda next to the bed holding a glass of water. Discreetly, she dropped a strangely colored pill into the glass. It was such a quick movement that if I hadn't been watching closely, I would have missed it. When I walked in, she jumped and spilled some water on the floor. "What pill is that, Linda?" I asked, trying to sound calm. She smiled, but her smile was forced. "It's a kidney supplement. The doctor prescribed it." I nodded, but a chill ran down my spine. I couldn't rest easy. After Michael finished eating, I looked for the doctor on duty, a middle-aged man with thick glasses. "Doctor?" I asked with a trembling voice, "did you prescribe any new kidney supplements for Michael?" He was surprised and checked the chart. "No, we haven't prescribed anything new. His current medication is sufficient." His answer left me frozen. I stood in the hospital hallway, listening to the announcements over the loudspeaker, but my mind was blank. Linda had lied. What was that pill? Why did she have to hide it? In the evening, Jacob came back to my house. This time he didn't play with his toy car. He sat in a chair and took an old cell phone out of his backpack, its screen cracked in one corner. "Grandma," he said in a low but firm voice, "I want you to hear this." He typed something and handed me the phone. A recording played. It was Linda's voice, whispering but clear. "After the transplant, the test results will be perfect. Don't worry, she won't dare refuse." I dropped the phone. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I looked at Jacob, my little grandson, and saw his eyes were red, as if he were just as scared as I was. "I found it on my mom's old phone," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what it is, but I thought you should know." I hugged Jacob, trying to hold back the tears. "You're very brave, sweetie," I whispered, but inside, everything was falling apart. Data results. What was Linda talking about? I thought about Michael, about the unlabeled bottles, about Daniel's suspicious gaze, about the strangely colored pill in the glass of water. They were loose pieces of a puzzle, but little by little they were fitting together, forming a picture I didn't dare look at. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my silent house listening to the ticking clock. Every second a reminder that Michael's time was running out. One morning, I went to the hospital carrying an old plastic container with hot food. The smell of rice and stewed meat escaped from the edges. Michael's room was white cold, and the smell of disinfectant was so strong I could hardly breathe. I had gotten used to that environment, but that day I felt a tightness in my chest. Michael lay there, his eyes sunken and his face pale, but he still tried to smile when he saw me. "Mom, you're here early," he said, his voice as faint as a whisper. I put the food on the small table and tried to smile, but a storm was raging inside me. The doubts from the past few days, Jacob's question, Daniel's warning, all screamed in my head, giving me no peace. Linda was already there, sitting by Michael's bed, her gaze fixed on the IV bag, dripping slowly. She didn't look at me, didn't greet me, just nodded silently as if my presence was a given. On the nightstand, I noticed a small pill bottle, its cap not fully closed, half hidden under a crumpled paper napkin. The bottle had no label, just a white plastic container with strange blue pills inside. I picked it up, trying to keep my voice steady. "What medicine is this, Linda?" She jumped, almost leaping from her chair, and snatched the bottle from my hands so quickly it made me take a step back. "They're just vitamins, Mom," she said with a smile as fake as peeling paint. "The doctor prescribed them to help his kidney." I nodded, but a chill ran down my spine. Linda's smile, the way she grabbed the bottle, everything was wrong, as if she were hiding a secret I wasn't supposed to know. I sat next to Michael and started to feed him, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about the unlabeled bottle, about what Daniel said about the weird medicines Linda was hiding. I was thinking about Jacob, about his innocent but sharp question. What if Dad is sick because someone is giving him medicine? I wanted to ask Linda right then and there. I wanted to scream and demand the truth, but I was afraid that if I opened my mouth, everything would fall apart, and I would lose Michael forever. I looked at my son, how he struggled to swallow each bite, and told myself, "Emily, you have to calm down. You have to find out what's going on first." At noon, Daniel arrived at the hospital. He walked in with his hands still stained with grease from work, and his old t-shirt was worn at the shoulders. He said nothing. He just sat silently in a corner watching Linda, who was in the hallway talking to a nurse. When she left, Daniel came over to me and pulled a small plastic bag from his backpack. "Mom, I want you to see this," he whispered, his voice as tense as a guitar string. He showed me his phone. On the screen were some blurry photos, but clear enough to make my heart stop. It was Linda in the back parking lot of the hospital, discreetly taking a small bag out of her car's trunk and handing it to an unknown man. The man wore a black jacket and a cap that covered most of his face, but I clearly saw the bag of medicine in Linda's hand, small bottles identical to the one on the nightstand. "I took these pictures yesterday," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "I followed her because her behavior was so strange. Mom, I'm afraid she's doing something to my brother Michael." I was speechless, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. The cold hospital floor seemed to suck all the warmth from my body. "Daniel," I whispered, "are you sure? Did you hear what they said?" Daniel shook his head, his eyes red. "I couldn't hear well, but I saw her give that bag to the man and he gave her an envelope. Mom, this isn't normal." I looked into Daniel's eyes. I saw the worry and anger in them, and I knew he wasn't lying. But still, I didn't want to believe it. Linda was Michael's wife. She had sworn to take care of him. How could she do something so terrible? That afternoon, when I returned home, Jacob came again. He didn't run or play like usual, but sat silently in a chair hugging his backpack. "Grandma," he said, his voice low but determined, "I want you to hear something." He took out the old cell phone with the broken screen from his backpack and, trembling, played an audio file. Linda's voice echoed, whispered but clear, like a stab to my heart. "After the transplant, the data will be complete. Don't worry, that old woman won't dare refuse this result, is worth 100 times more." I froze, dropping the phone on the table, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I looked at Jacob, my little grandson, and saw his red eyes, his lips pressed together as if holding back tears. "I found it on my mom's old phone," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't know what it is, but I thought you should know." I hugged Jacob, feeling as if the whole world were collapsing at my feet. "You are so brave, Jacob," I whispered, but my voice broke and tears rolled down my cheeks. I thought about Michael, about the unlabeled bottles, about Daniel's photos, about Jacob's recording. They were scattered pieces, but they were fitting together, painting a dark picture I didn't dare face. What was Linda doing? What data? What results? And why did she say, "That old woman won't dare refuse"? I felt betrayed not just by Linda but by my own faith and family and love. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in my silent house listening to the sirens of an ambulance in the street, the red and blue lights flashing through the window like cuts in my soul. I thought of Michael, of how he grew weaker every day of the strange medicines of Linda's calculating whispers. I thought of Daniel, of the suspicion and worry in his eyes, and of Jacob, the 9-year-old boy who had bravely brought me the truth. I held my head, feeling like my brain was going to explode. I wanted to run to the hospital, confront Linda's scream, and demand an explanation. But I was scared that the truth would be even more horrible than I imagined, scared I wouldn't have the strength to bear it. I got up, went out to the patio, and looked at the pale moonlight. I thought of David, my silent husband, who could only sit and watch everything. I wanted to tell him, to ask him what I should do, but I knew he wouldn't answer. I was alone with the pieces of a truth that was slowly being revealed. The next morning, I woke up with the feeling that the whole world was weighing on my chest. The chirping of the birds on the patio, a sound that usually brought me calm, now felt like knives stabbing my mind. I knew today was the day the hospital would make the final decision about Michael's kidney transplant. The clues Jacob and Daniel had given me, the recording, the photos, the unlabeled bottle kept swirling in my head, but I didn't dare face them. I was afraid that if I dug deeper, I would find a truth I couldn't bear. I just wanted to save Michael, to see my son healthy again, even if the price was a part of my body. But deep down, I knew things weren't that simple. The hospital scheduled me for a meeting at noon. I entered a small conference room where Dr. Anderson was already waiting. He spread the test results on the table, white sheets filled with numbers and graphs I didn't understand. "Mrs. Emily," he said, his voice deep but firm, "we have reviewed everything thoroughly. You are the most compatible person to donate a kidney to Michael. If we don't proceed soon, his life will be in danger." I sat there gripping the edge of my blouse, my head buzzing as if there were a swarm of bees inside. "I understand," I whispered, but my voice was so low I doubted he heard me. Dr. Anderson looked at me, and his expression softened. "Do you need more time to think about it?" he asked. I shook my head, not because I had already decided, but because I felt like I had no other choice. Linda, her parents, and even Michael were all counting on me, and I couldn't let my son die. Through the glass door, I saw Linda standing with her arms crossed, her gaze as sharp as ever. She gave a nod to her mother, Mrs. Thompson, as if she was sure I wouldn't dare refuse. That gesture sent a shiver down my spine, as if they were playing a chess game where I was just a pawn. I wanted to stand up to shout that I knew about the bottle, about the recording, but I couldn't. I just sat there feeling trapped in an invisible cage with no escape. That evening, I gathered the whole family in my small house. The living room was crowded, the yellowish light from an old bulb reflected on the worn walls. I put a teapot on the table. The minty aroma couldn't dispel the heavy atmosphere. Linda's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, sat in the center, occupying the two best chairs as if they were the owners. Linda sat next to them, her hands clasped, and glanced at me out of the corner of her eye to make sure I wouldn't back out. Michael was lying on a couch, his face pale and his breathing shallow. Daniel was leaning against the wall, silent, but his eyes were red, as if holding back a rage about to erupt. Jacob was curled up in a corner, hugging his small backpack, his face filled with anguish. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling as I set down the teapot. "I've made a decision," I said, my voice shaky, but trying to sound firm. "I'm going to donate my kidney to Michael." The room exploded like a bomb. Mrs. Thompson clapped, her voice shrill. "That's a real mother. I knew you wouldn't disappoint this family." Linda covered her face. Tears streamed down, but I saw her clenching her fists as if she were acting in a play. "Oh, Mom," she said, her voice choked. "I knew you love him more than anyone. Thank you." Michael looked at me. His eyes clouded with exhaustion, but he still managed to say, "Mom, I owe you my life." His words broke my heart like a stab in the chest. But then Daniel jumped up and slammed his hand on the table. The blow made the teacups rattle. "No," he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "Mom, don't you see? You're sacrificing yourself for a wicked plan. She's using you, and she's using my brother Michael." The air in the room grew thick. The only sound was the buzzing of a mosquito around the light bulb. Linda shot up and pointed at Daniel. "What are you saying? You dare accuse me I do everything for my husband." But Daniel didn't back down. He stepped closer, his eyes blazing. "Accuse you? What about those unlabeled bottles and those midnight calls, Mom? You can't let them fool you." I looked at Daniel, then at Linda, and finally at Michael. I wanted to say something to ask Daniel to calm down, but I couldn't. I just looked away, feeling the whole world crashing down on me. That night, I sat alone in my small room at the old wooden table. The oil lamp flickered. Its dim light illuminated the shaky words I was writing in my will. I wrote that the small house would go to Daniel and a few of my few valuables to Jacob. Each stroke was like a cut to my soul. I didn't know if I would survive the operation, but I wanted to be prepared to leave something for those I loved. David sat motionless in his wheelchair in a corner, watching me with his lifeless eyes. I saw his hand tremble as if he wanted to say something but couldn't. I looked at him, and tears rolled down my cheeks. "David, I have to do it right. I have to save Michael." He didn't answer, just blinked, and 2 tears fell down his gaunt cheeks. I folded the will and put it at the bottom of an old wooden box where I kept my wedding mementos. Outside, the rain poured down, mixing with the sound of my own sobs. Early in the morning, when the sky was still dark and fog clung to the small streets leading to the hospital, I was lying on a stretcher in an ambulance. I clutched a small cloth bag with a couple of changes of clothes and an embroidered handkerchief I had kept since my wedding day. The ambulance siren wailed, but I no longer paid attention. The streetlights filtered through the window, blurry like my broken dreams. I closed my eyes and tried to breathe, but my chest felt tight. Today was the day I would donate my kidney to Michael, my son. I had already decided. I had written my will. I had prepared myself mentally, but my heart was still in a knot, as if I were entering a nightmare from which I couldn't wake. When the ambulance stopped, a nurse pushed the stretcher down an endless hospital corridor. The squeak of the wheels on the tile floor was like a hammer hitting my head. Linda walked behind. Her steps were light but firm, like a guard's. "Don't worry, Mom," she said in a low but sharp voice. "After the surgery, everything will be fine." I glanced at her and saw a flash of triumph in her eyes, as if she had already secured victory. Her smile sent a shiver down my spine, not from cold, but from the feeling that I was being led into a plan where I was just a pawn with no will of my own. Linda's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, were already at the reception. They were well-dressed, Mr. Thompson in an old but well-pressed suit, and Mrs. Thompson in a bright red dress, as if they were attending a grand event and not a surgery. They took Linda's arm and greeted the doctors with exaggerated politeness, as if they had known them forever. I heard Mrs. Thompson laugh out loud as she said to a young doctor, "Thank you for all your support, doctor. We won't forget this favor." I just stood there clutching my cloth bag, feeling like a stranger in my own story. Michael had already been taken to a waiting area. They let me see him before entering the operating room. The small room was freezing, and his thin arms were full of IV lines. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, but when he saw me, he tried to smile weakly. "Mom, thank you," he whispered, his voice broken with exhaustion. I took his hand. It was ice cold, and I felt like crying. "Michael, I'll do anything to help you recover," I said. But my voice trembled as if I were trying to convince myself. I looked into my son's eyes. I saw absolute trust in them, and I wondered, am I doing the right thing, or am I risking my life for something I don't fully understand? Suddenly Daniel ran in his hands, still stained with grease from work. He was panting, his t-shirt soaked with sweat, as if he had run a long way. "Mom, don't do it," he said, almost pleading as he grabbed my shoulders. "I'm begging you, don't donate the kidney. Something isn't right." I looked at Daniel. I saw his red eyes filled with anger and worry. I wanted to tell him that I had already decided that I couldn't let Michael die, but the words wouldn't come out. I just placed my hand on his, squeezed it gently, and let the nurse take me away. Daniel was left there helpless, shouting behind me, "Mom, listen to me." But I didn't turn back. I didn't dare turn back because I was afraid that if I looked into Daniel's eyes, I would break down. The hospital corridor was long and cold. The smell of disinfectant was so strong it made me nauseous. An impersonal voice came over the loudspeakers. "Operating room number 3, prepare for a kidney transplant." They took me to a dressing room where a nurse put a cap and a mask on me. The cold blue gown they put on me was a reminder that I was about to lose a part of my body. I looked at myself in the mirror. I saw my gaunt face, my eyes surrounded by dark circles. I wondered, "Emily, what are you doing? Are you sure this is the right thing?" But then the image of Michael in the hospital bed appeared in my mind, and I gritted my teeth and moved on. As I walked down the hall, I caught a glimpse of Linda and Mrs. Thompson standing by a glass window talking to an unknown man. He was wearing a black jacket and a cap that covered his face identical to the man in the photo Daniel had shown me. I saw Linda hand him an envelope and he quickly put it in his jacket pocket. My heart started pounding, cold sweat ran down my neck. What were they doing? What was in that envelope? I wanted to stop to scream and demand an answer, but the nurse took my arm and led me into the operating room. Inside the operating room, the white light shone directly into my eyes, so bright I had to squint. Dr. Anderson was there, his face serious but calm. "Everything is ready, Mrs. Emily," he said in a deep voice. "Just relax." I nodded, but my body was stiff. The nurse placed the electrodes on my chest, and the beep-beep of the monitor was constant, but each beat was like a warning. Linda appeared on the other side of the glass, pressed her face to it, and motioned for me to sign quickly, gesturing towards the papers another nurse was holding. I took the pen, trembling, the ink smudged on the paper as I signed. I felt as if I were signing my own death sentence. I looked at my blurry signature thought about the will I had written the night before about Daniel, about Jacob, and I wondered, will this be the last time I'm conscious? Just as the doctor was preparing to inject the anesthesia, my heart was pounding furiously. A cold sweat soaked my back. I closed my eyes, tried to breathe, but the images of Michael, Daniel, Jacob, and Linda spun in my head. I thought of Jacob's recording of the unlabeled bottle of Daniel's photo. I wanted to stop everything, but I couldn't. I had come too far. I had signed. I had entered this room. I could only lie there waiting with a fear that choked my heart. But then, just as the nurse was about to inject the anesthesia, a loud crash shook the entire room. The door flew open, the screech of its hinges tearing through the air. The entire team of doctors and nurses jumped, some turned sharply, panic in their eyes. Jacob burst in like a small tornado. His sneakers were still stained with mud, his school uniform wrinkled, and his little chest heaved as he panted. He was clutching his old cell phone with the broken screen as if it were the most precious thing in the world. A nurse ran after him, screaming desperately, "Kid, you can't come in here! Oh my God, stop!" But Jacob didn't stop. He ran straight to me, his big round eyes full of fear, but burning with a determination I had never seen in a child. "Grandma?" he said, his voice trembling, but so clear it froze everyone in the room. "Should I tell them all why my dad really needs your kidney?" His words were like a bomb exploding in my head. I held my breath, my heart seemed to stop. The operating room fell into absolute silence, broken only by the beep-beep of the heart monitor, which now sounded louder, as if it wanted to shatter the stillness. A nearby doctor dropped a pair of surgical forceps. The metallic sound against the marble floor was jarring like a tear in the tense air. Dr. Anderson, the lead surgeon, raised a hand, signaling the entire team to stop. He frowned, but his voice was calm and firm. "Let the boy speak. Whatever you have to say it now." I looked at Jacob, saw his little hand clutching the phone, his face pale, but his eyes bright as if he carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. Outside behind the glass, Linda slammed the door with fury, making the glass rattle. "Don't listen to him!" she shrieked, her voice high-pitched, almost hysterical. "He's just a kid. What does he know?" But Linda's gaze was no longer ice-cold. It was trembling, filled with panic, as if the secret she had tried so hard to hide was about to come out. Jacob didn't look at his mom. He came closer to me, and with trembling hands, he pressed play on the phone. A recording played. Linda's voice whispered, but sharp, like a knife stabbing my heart. "After the transplant, the test data will be perfect. Don't worry, that old woman won't dare refuse." The entire room seemed to explode in silence. I felt my blood run cold, the air stuck in my throat. Dr. Anderson turned sharply to look at me, his eyes wide with astonishment. "Stop!" he ordered, his voice as sharp as a scalpel. "Stop all preparations right now." A nurse quickly withdrew the syringe. The others stood motionless, not daring to move. Linda, on the other side of the glass, let out a scream and pounded on the door. "It's not true. She made it all up. This child is being manipulated." But her voice broke as if even she didn't believe her own words. I looked at Jacob and saw him burst into tears, but he still clung to the phone as if it were the last piece of evidence to save me. "I also have a video," he said, his voice choked, "of my mom and my grandparents talking about selling medicines." He played a video. The image was blurry but clear enough. Linda and Mrs. Thompson in the parking lot exchanging an envelope with the unknown man I had seen before. Mrs. Thompson's voice was heard. "After this operation, we will have enough data to sell the medicine abroad. This money will change everything." I lay there, my vision blurred by tears, feeling a mix of horror and relief. Horror at the truth I had tried so hard to avoid, now exposed before everyone, and relief, because finally I no longer had to lie to myself. Daniel burst in from the hallway, his face red with anger. "That's enough!" he shouted, lunging at the glass door to confront Linda. "You poisoned him! Did you think we were all blind?" Before anyone could react, Daniel raised his hand and slapped Linda. The sharp sound echoed through the hallway, making Mrs. Thompson scream. "How dare you hit my daughter!" But Daniel didn't stop. He pointed at Linda, his voice shaking with rage. "What medicines have you been giving him? What did you do to my brother Michael?" Linda put her hand to her cheek. Tears streamed down her face, but in her eyes I saw no remorse, only the panic of someone who has been caught. "You're crazy!" she screamed at him, turning to Dr. Anderson. "Don't listen to them. They're slandering me." But Dr. Anderson didn't respond. He turned pale and addressed a nurse. "This is no longer a surgery. It's a crime scene. Call the police now." A nurse ran out while the others stood there looking at each other in confusion. I lay there feeling the world crumble. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. I looked at Jacob, my little grandson, who had bravely burst into the operating room to save me. I looked at Daniel, my younger son, who had tried to protect me at all costs. And I thought of Michael, my son lying in the next room, not knowing that the wife he trusted had betrayed him. I stayed there letting the tears flow, letting the truth seep into every fiber of my being. At that moment, I understood that everything had changed. The truth had exploded like a door kicked down, and nothing could hide it anymore. The operating room, once cold and silent, had turned into a chaotic battlefield. The nurses, confused, looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Dr. Anderson frowned. His sharp gaze scanned each person as if trying to maintain order amidst the storm. I lay there, my vision blurred by tears, but unable to look away from the scene. The truth that Jacob had just revealed like a fire was burning away all the trust I had left. Linda, after Daniel's slap, clutched her cheek and screamed in a shrill voice, "How dare you hit me? I do everything for my husband!" Tears streamed down her face, but I clearly saw the panic in her eyes. It wasn't the pain of a wrongly accused wife, but the fear of someone who had been discovered. She turned to her parents, grabbing Mrs. Thompson's blouse, her voice breaking. "I didn't do anything wrong. I just wanted to save Michael. Dad, Mom, say something." But Mr. and Mrs. Thompson stood there, their faces pale, unable to say a word. Mrs. Thompson, normally so sharp and authoritarian now, just wrung her hands, biting her lip to stop a tremor. Suddenly, Mrs. Thompson slammed her cane on the floor. The sharp sound of wood against tile echoed, and she pointed directly at me. "You dared to manipulate your grandson, to invent lies about me and Linda, you wicked old woman." Her words were like a stab to my heart. I wanted to scream to tell her I hadn't manipulated anyone, that it was her daughter who had betrayed my family. But I had a lump in my throat and couldn't speak. I just lay there looking at her, feeling cornered in a dark place, where all my years of sacrifice were being trampled. Mr. Thompson, Linda's father, discreetly whispered to a doctor he knew who was nearby, his voice low but urgent. "Please continue with the surgery. We'll take care of everything. We just need this to be over." He slipped an envelope into the doctor's hand, but Dr. Anderson immediately approached, his voice as cold as ice. "The law decides here, not money." He snatched the envelope, threw it on the floor, and ordered a nurse. "Lock the doors. Nobody leaves. I'm going to inform the hospital administration right now." The sound of his footsteps was firm, like a declaration that everything had spun out of control. Daniel from the hallway burst into the operating room, ignoring a nurse's attempts to stop him. He grabbed my shoulders, his eyes red, and shouted, "Mom, don't donate the kidney. It's all their plan. She poisoned my brother Michael. Don't you see?" Daniel's voice trembled, full of rage and pain. I looked into his eyes and saw the desperation of a son trying to protect his mother. I wanted to say something to comfort him, but I couldn't. I just lay there feeling the world crumbling at my feet. From the prep room next door, Michael's weak and confused voice was heard. "What's going on? Why are you all arguing?" He tried to sit up. Breathing heavily, the IV lines in his arm trembled with the movement. I heard my son's voice, and my heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Michael knew nothing. He didn't know that the wife he loved, whom he trusted, had dragged the entire family into a dark conspiracy. I wanted to run to him, hug him, and tell him everything would be okay, but I couldn't move. I just lay there, tears streaming down my face, feeling torn between my love for Michael and the horrible truth that had just come to light. Jacob, standing by my side, broke into heartbroken sobs, but still held up the phone and said in a choked voice, "I have another video." This is when my mom gives the medicines to my grandparents. He played the video, and the image appeared on the small screen. Linda and Mrs. Thompson in the parking lot making the exchange with the unknown man. Mrs. Thompson's voice was heard clear and cold. "If the transplant is a success, we can sell the medicine abroad. With that money, we can launder all the dirty profits." The entire room fell silent. A nurse covered her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Dr. Anderson stood frozen, clutching the file as if containing his anger. Linda, in a panic, lunged to snatch the phone from Jacob, trying to throw it to the ground. "No, that's fake!" she screamed, her voice breaking. But Daniel was faster. He took the phone and pushed Linda, who fell to the floor. One of her heels flew off, bouncing on the floor with a sharp sound like the final punctuation of the charade she had created. "Shut your mouth!" Daniel shouted, his face red with fury. "Do you think you can fool everyone? What did you do to my brother?" Linda sat on the floor, her hair disheveled, but her gaze still had a spark of defiance. "I didn't do anything. You are all slandering me." Hospital security appeared. 2 uniformed men entered with serious expressions. They approached Linda, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, giving them no time to react. Mrs. Thompson was still cursing, her cane trembling in her hand. "Traitor, you destroyed this family!" She pointed at me, but her voice broke as if she herself knew it was all over. Linda held firmly, struggled. "Let me go. I didn't do anything wrong." But her eyes now only reflected the desperation of someone cornered. I lay there motionless, my body cold, but with my eyes wide open, watching the truth unfold before me. When the operating room door closed behind the police, the screams of Linda and her parents still echoed in the hospital hallway, but to me, they faded into the air like a dissipating nightmare. Linda kept shouting, her voice broken. "I was contributing to science. Nobody understands me." But no one answered her. Mr. and Mrs. Thompson, who had once sat with such arrogance in my living room, now walked with their heads down, escorted in silence. I lay on the operating table, still shaking, but it was no longer from fear. A strange sense of relief washed over me, as if I had been freed from a cage I didn't know I was in. Dr. Anderson approached. His face was serious, but his gaze had softened. "Mrs. Emily," he said gravely, "we are canceling the surgery. We will move Michael to an alternative treatment, dialysis combined with new medications. You have risked your health preparing for this, but you have saved your life and your dignity." I looked at him, tears rolling down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. "Thank you, doctor," I whispered, my voice weak but sincere. I didn't know if I had truly saved my dignity, but I knew that for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again, really breathe. Daniel ran to me and helped me sit up. He took my hand tightly, his gaze firm but full of pain. "You still have me, Mom," he said, his voice choked. "I'm going to protect you from now on, I promise." I squeezed his hand, feeling the warmth of his rough, grease-stained skin. I looked into Daniel's eyes and saw the strength of a son willing to carry the world to protect his mother. "You are my pride, son," I whispered, and the tears fell again. Daniel said nothing, just hugged me tightly, and in that embrace I found some comfort amidst the ruins of my family. Michael was moved to a recovery room. When I entered, he was lying down, his face pale and the IVs still in his arms. He looked at me, his eyes red, and asked in a weak voice, "Mom, is it true that everything my wife did was to hurt me?" His question was like a stab in my heart. I went to him, sat beside him on the bed, and hugged him. My tears fell wetting his hospital gown. "Oh, Michael, my son," I said, my voice choked. "I don't know where all this started, but I promise you I won't let anyone hurt you anymore." Michael lowered his head. Tears rolled down his thin cheeks. "Mom, I was wrong," he whispered. "I didn't protect you, and I let you suffer too much." I held him tighter, feeling as if only the two of us were left in the world, clinging to each other in the middle of the storm that had just passed. In the following days, the newspapers began to cover the story. "Drug trafficking ring busted in local hospital." The headlines screamed. They wrote about a group of doctors and pharmacists involved in which Linda and her parents were key players. They had been testing illegal drugs on patients like Michael, using the kidney transplant as a smokescreen to collect data for an international organization. Reading those words filled me with horror and pain. I thought of Linda, of the times she served me food, of her sweet words that I now knew were false. I thought of Michael, of the months he suffered not knowing his own wife was endangering him. Michael began his dialysis and medication treatment. His health improved slowly but steadily. One afternoon he took my hand, lowered his head, and said in a choked voice, "Mom, I was blind. I trusted Linda and almost let you lose everything." I stroked his head like when he was a child and said, "Son, the important thing is that you're still here. That's all I need." But in my heart, a scar had formed, not just from Linda's betrayal, but because I had let myself be pushed to the edge of life and death without asking questions. I returned to my small house where David was still motionless in his wheelchair. I sat next to him and told him everything from Jacob's recording to the scene of Linda being handcuffed. I don't know if he understood everything, but when I finished speaking, I saw him blink, and 2 tears rolled down his gaunt cheeks. I took his hand, squeezed it, and for the first time in years I felt a small response from him, a weak squeeze, as if he were trying to tell me he understood. I burst into tears, not of pain, but because I knew that despite everything I still had him, I still had my family. Jacob became the little hero of the neighborhood. The day he came home, he ran to me, hugged my neck, and whispered, "Grandma, I'm sorry it took me so long to speak up, but at least I made it in time to save you." I laughed through my tears, hugging the boy, feeling the warmth of his small body. "You're the bravest person I know," I said, ruffling his hair. Jacob smiled, the first smile I had seen from him in days. I looked into his eyes and saw that his innocence was still there, though stained by what he had to witness. I promised myself to protect Jacob, to give him a childhood that no one could steal from him. The last night I sat in my small room under the flickering light of the oil lamp. I opened my old diary and wrote the final lines. "Blood doesn't always make you family. Sometimes it's the truth that shows you who truly deserves to be called family. I lost a lot, but I found myself." I closed the diary, put down the pen, and listened to the rain hitting the patio roof. I felt a strange calm, as if the storm had passed, leaving a clear sky. I looked out the window, saw the pale moonlight illuminating the patio, and I knew that although the road ahead was long, I would never let myself be blinded again. I had reclaimed my own strength, and that was the most valuable thing anyone could ever take from me. The story you've just heard has had names and locations changed to protect the identities of those involved. We don't tell this for judgment, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to think. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I truly wonder if you were in my shoes. What would you do? Would you choose to stay silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to get your voice back? I want to know your opinion because every story is like a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I'm convinced that bravery leads us to better days. In the meantime, on the end screen, I'm leaving you two of the channel's most loved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thanks for staying with me until this moment.